If you could sum up the state of the Norwegian news media in one number.
3.4 million people, the total reach for all the editorial media that we measure, larger than the coverage that Facebook alone has, that Snapchat has, Instagram, TikTok, each of the global platforms.
Today I'm joined by Bente Håvimb, the project manager at MBL, the Norwegian Media Business Association. Bente has been leading Medietall since its launch in 2021.
Medietall, it's the go-to source for insights about Norwegian media consumption. It covers audience data, traditional reach data, circulation data, how many subscriptions are sold.
Publishers who normally compete against each other share their data in one place, creating what Bente calls one shared truth for the media industry. Why is it important that the industry shares these numbers?
Because then you can have a shared story when you talk about the market, the media market. It's not someone comparing apples to pears, it's actually apples to apples.
Bente, if you could sum up the state of the Norwegian news media in one number from Medietall, which I would translate as the media numbers directly, what would it be and why?
I think the number that I would like to highlight today is the total reach for all the editorial media that we measure at Medietall. It's a total reach of 3.4 million people. And what most people don't realize is that that's actually larger than the coverage that Facebook alone has in Norway, that Snapchat has, Instagram, TikTok, each of the global platforms. So it's actually a vast coverage of the Norwegian population through editorial media. And it's also spread across like 190 titles used by Norwegians and also Norwegians traveling abroad.
When we're going to be talking about Medietall today, and I were thinking to a direct translation, that would be the media numbers. And as I said in the intro here about MBL and Medietall, for the first-time listeners, how would you explain what is Medietall and MBL where you work?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that question. I'm very glad that I'm able to be here and talk about it. For Medietall, it's the go-to source, I would say, for insights about Norwegian media consumption. So it covers audience data, traditional reach data, it covers circulation data, how many newspaper subscriptions are sold, and we also publish reports on consumer behavior, like are Norwegian consumers willing to pay for news, how do they adopt new platforms, and not the least, how do they interact with AI now that that's become popular. So if you're just curious about all these things, then you should visit Medietall, media figures, media numbers, call it what you want. And here you can see each of the titles, all the titles in the newspaper market in Norway, just both print, digital, also NRK, TV2. If you wonder which one of them has the highest reach, if you wonder which one of them has sold the most subscriptions lately, this is the place to go to.
I find this actually quite unique because having traveled around the globe at different events talking with publishers, one thing that I very often see is that some publishers are very secretive about showing their numbers and sharing them because they feel heavy competition in the market. And that brings me, I'm really, really curious on this about but why is it important that the industry shares these numbers, like page views and the reach they're having openly? And what would be lost if we didn't do it?
I think the need to document is just bigger than it's ever been. You have so many sources where you can find statistics these days, but not all sources are equally trustworthy. So the most important thing, I think, with this site and with the sharing of this data is the transparency. It's the transparency as what methods we use, and also about what's actually behind the numbers. So it should be accessible to everyone, because then you can have a shared story when you talk about the market, the media market. It's not someone comparing apples to pears, it's actually apples to apples. Everyone knows what we're talking about, and we're then able to trust this data and talk about the actual development in the media market, not the source of the data or the quality of the data. when everyone has agreed upon a standard. So I think that's been very crucial to us and to our members in the committee. Maybe not everyone knows, but I work in MBL, which is the Norwegian Media Business Association, and we work to develop solutions to suit our members and to suit the market. And in this case, with Medietall, to be able to present data to the market. And it's openly presented both to the media themselves, but also to advertisers and the common media market. So everyone has access to this site. It's owned by MBL. So we decide when to change things, what to put in there, and everything is openly accessible. You can also reach it through just download the data, or you can use an API and integrate it into your own system, or you can use an iframe and embed it into your web page for different reasons. So I think this is all part of the why share the numbers, share the knowledge, have the same information to create and facilitate the good discussions in the business.
How about you in this? What is your role when it comes to the Medietall, and what do you do in terms of, are you presenting the numbers? Are you looking at it? What is your role in the Medietall?
Yeah, yes and yes would be the answer to that. I'm the project manager. So I've been working on from the beginning in 2021 when we started setting up these new measurements. I was in charge of that, down to the technical details, down to comparing data from previous audience measurements that we've had. How does it every figure change with new methodologies? And also the more strategic choices that we make. We have a steering committee, we have a technical committee that we run, and of course we have a group of the head of marketing in the different publishing houses that we discuss with. So, and in the end, we take these results and we have events and we tell the market, how does this look? And also we use it for the publisher, we use it for the advertising market, and we also use it for the government and the processes in securing regulations for the media industry. So I kind of play a part in all of this this process.
You mentioned something in the beginning before this, how important trust is in terms of the media outlets. And I am a little bit curious because it's a very openness in terms of everybody sharing their numbers. And do you think that the openness strengthens the role that the Norwegian publishers have in the sort of wider media landscape, which is now YouTube, you have Facebook, Meta, you have so many different media channels. Like, what does the openness here contribute to for the media publishers?
Well, I think it contributes to the industry as a whole being able to leverage themselves. You know, each alone is strong, but together we're stronger. And to be able to work together on that, to inform the market about both levels of trust, of course, that we have service about, but also the quality of the data. And it lays the ground for continued innovation. So I think what we've been talking about, as I started with the reach of the Norwegian publishers, if you look at that in contrast to the global competition, I think this openness is where we have to begin, and to be able to see the bigger picture and see how can you compete on the global arena, which is really, really a tough market.
But if I were to play devil's advocate on this, I mean, you have like Schibsted and the brands, you have Amedia and Aller in Norway. These are competitors. Why would they share numbers together on these? I mean, how do you get them to even sit in the same table and agree to share? Like, seeing this globally, you would have bitter competition between some of them. How do you overcome that?
It's not really been an issue to overcome the competition. I think where we came from with the measurements that we used to have and where we wanted to go, it was a natural process. We had to sit down together. We had some common goals. And, you know, the Norwegian media market is also very specific in that we have a large part of subscribers. In the economy, we have about 65% of the income now comes from subscribers, while some 30% come from the advertising market. So we have a lot of data on the users, first-party data, not third-party data. So to be able to talk about this and how can we improve from where we came from and move forward in a market which is economically challenged also. So we wanted to improve the quality, but we also wanted to keep costs down. So I think the incentive to get in the same room and see what kind of data do we all together have in our data pools today, and how can we use this for the common benefit for the business. Not that they're going to stop competing, because that's also internal competition is a part of it, but you also need to see the bigger picture. And we had someone from one of the marketing executives that said we have to cooperate where we can, but we have to compete when we must. And I think that's a good quote enable to move forward.
I mean, I would say also, I heard the same, is that compete on content, collaborate on technology, and find a way to then sort of stay stronger in the environment, because it's maybe not just the publishers shouldn't see themselves as sort of like competition themselves. I mean, the wider competition is maybe with Meta, with Google, now with the ChatGPT and OpenAI coming into. What are your thoughts on that? Is this a way to also collaborate to make the media publishers stand stronger against outside competition from big tech?
Of course, the first step is to be able to say, this is what you can get from Norwegian publishers, and you can talk to the advertisers about that. When we can say to the market that if you buy advertisements through the editorial media, you can have a reach as great as whichever social media that you choose. So I think that's crucial, and also it's crucial for the discussion that you don't discuss methods all the time, so where the figures are from, because you have this group that's sat together and decided on the same systems, the same definitions, the accessibility, and not the least the privacy rules, how to use this system. So I think this is for the common benefit and helps Norwegian media also to compete with the global platforms.
I'm quite curious about, Bente, is that in order to get these numbers from the different publishers, how you work as sort of an organization for these media publishers, are you doing this alone? How are you achieving this, and how would you enable for these numbers to be available for everybody?
Yeah, we don't do this alone. It requires a huge set of collaboration across our partners. Most importantly, I would say our publishers' willingness to share their own data, not for every purpose, but for the specific purposes that are needed. For example, we use now login data and ID data together with technical cookie data from our publishers, enabled to make this model where we go from purely technical cookie data into people figures, which is what the market is looking to buy. So of course the publishers, and then we need a technical vendor in order to collect this data, and that's where Kilkaya comes in. So we're happy to work with you guys. And also we need to connect this to a broader set of data. And then we work with Kantar Media, which has their target group index, where they collect interview data on the population in Norway. So we can actually connect the reach data into demographics, geographics, and tons of consumer related data. And all of this is, of course, available also to the advertisers and the agencies. So it's a system that navigates the data through the process. In the end, we choose to publish much of this data at Medietall for free, and then of course you can buy add-ons from Kantar and Kilkaya.
I think one of the things that you said there, and we're really happy to be doing this collaboration with you guys, is it's a methodology where you have one common truth of looking at the data, and what we all in the end want to do is to see that media publisher do have the biggest coverage, that maybe also could then give a good reach compared to the big tech out there. Yeah.
So it's the same. It's a currency that is trusted by the publishers, by the agencies, and by the institutes. So it's always better when we all talk the same language.
Let's talk a little bit about where you talked about the advertisers and the value from this, because when we're having the set of data that is giving indication in terms of the coverage, how the different titles are performing, and the overall number. How do these numbers help make the case for now, like investing in Norwegian journalism? What is the value it brings?
I think you need to put this data together with the other contextual data. So when you know that we have the publishers have a strong reach from other services that we also publish, you know that they are very, very well trusted. I think in surveys done in Norway, 65% of the advertisers, they say they trust Norwegian media exposures more than foreign platforms, for example. So this is also something that we try to highlight. Medietall shows, in addition, that we have a very high share of people visiting directly to the front page. So we have strong brands, which also is connected to trust. And we have a huge amount of logged in users. That will mean that you have loyal users in a safe environment. So this combination of trust, reach, and the direct relationships really makes this worthwhile for the advertising market as well, I think. And the paradox that I've been talking a lot about in Norway is that the advertisers, they say that the Norwegian media development is important, but still lots of the money goes to the global platforms. So if you follow the Norwegian news press these days, there's a lot of discussions about this, and it's really great that we get this subject in the open, and we have the possibility to discuss this together. And I think Medietall can also be used as a source in this debate and be resourceful to every party. And also, I would like to add, because I was listening, I was just remembering, I was listening to Anne from WPP in a previous podcast of yours, and she said it's hard to get the necessary knowledge about local news press. And that's exactly what Medietall is for as well. Here you can actually see figures for all Norwegian titles down to very, very small local newspapers also, and see their reach in different areas and different target groups in an easy accessible way. So I would actually pull that back to Anne and tell her to take a look at Medietall as well.
How are the clever media sellers at the publishers using this data to show the value to the advertisers? We're of course talking about the coverage here and so on, but do you have example of how a media seller would use these data in a clever way to indicate the value that the publishers are generating?
Yeah, I used to be a media seller once upon a time, and you can of course use reach, but that's not all of it, because sometimes you want to target specific groups. What we also do is that we allow the publishers to group their advertising products. So today, for example, you can buy different newspapers like VG, Dagbladet, you can go to TV2 on their website, but you can also do these commercial advertising campaigns running the whole of the Schibsted, for example, or DR across a media and outlet. So it's easy to see how you can both gain reach, but also target your specific groups that you want to reach.
Yeah, I think it's in general about giving a stronger position for the media publishers to share and having a data statistic that indicates what they're able to provide. I think one of the conversation I had with Anne, as you mentioned, is that the advertisers are having such a more broad media plan when it comes to where they're putting the money, and then having the indication in terms of the statistics here makes even a better indication of where do I put my money.
Yeah, of course. And you have to look at this in the broader picture as well. We publish primarily for print and digital. And then you need to look to Nielsen, who has the radio measurements. You need to look to Kantar, who has the TV measurements, and put it all into your system. So I see that today we have most of our users are actually the publishers themselves. So it's also a call out to the advertisers and the agencies to contact us, asks us, helps us develop this further and to making it even more attractive as a tool for the agencies.
How would you say typically the publisher themselves use these numbers, and what sort of data are they looking at?
They use it on several levels. So one is the day-to-day comparison with your competitors in Norway. So you can actually tell if there's a news story that really is a big news story. You can see how was the traffic to different news sites. How do they compare with each other? If you have two local newspapers in a small town and there's a big accident or crime incidents happening, you can actually look into the data real closely. On the second level, you can look at each of the titles and see how they develop over time, over a longer period of time in different target groups. So, for example, we can see now that the reach among the younger generations are declining, which is very important to follow closely. And also we can see that at the same time, if you measure social media, we do this comparison, we can see that more and more of the young people using social media, which is something that everyone knows. But to be able to follow this on a weekly basis and see how this develops is really important for us. And then in the end, also to see how do we compare with the global competition. I think it's very important. So you have all levels of use cases.
Yeah, and especially for publishers, reaching the younger generation is one on top of mind in terms of strategies. Today, we have Media in Norway who just launched a project now to give a free subscription for younger people to then attract them to the news. And we see also in Kilkaya a lot of publishers using us to not look at all of the audience, they look at everybody below 40, which is such a centralized, and combining this as into the different segment groups gives another indication of what are you able to provide in terms of the coverage. But I mean, in the end of the day, like, how do you sort of measure success with Medietall and for the media industry as a whole, or not just MBL? Like, what is success in terms of having openness in these data, and what's success for you?
Yeah, I think every publisher, every agency need to create their own story about what success is or not. But for us running this system, success is about quality, it's about relevance, and it's about something that's a lot of people take for granted, but it's stability. And we work in a market that is evolving continuously. So we need to stay on top, continue to change this, how we run things in order to be relevant and to contain the stability in the measurements, because we've been doing this since, not the system with Kilkaya, but we've been measuring audience data with Kanta since 1960s. So of course the comparability aspect is also important for us in this system. So I think now we'll be talking a lot about reach, but it's not all about that, and it won't be in the future. Just to be aware of the different types of both how consumer habits are changing and what this means and how we need to adjust to that, and also what KPIs would be most interesting for people to buy media on and to follow internally, so to be able to compete in a market and continue innovating. Yeah, I think in order to be successful, we need to meet the demands of all our user groups and continue to create values.
I'll give you context to the next question I'm gonna be asking, because one thing that I think is interesting, looking at the media publishing industry on a global level, having been in different markets to see the different challenges. I think it's 2 weeks ago, I went to Arendal in Norway, and for the international listeners, in Arendal, there's a week in Norway where you have a big political event where a lot of the politician people get together at Arendalsuka to discuss different problems with how politics can solve it and others. And it was quite interesting in terms of looking into the media. And you had, I think it was Goldstad Røes, editor-in-chief in VG, and there was an article with the headline, Code Red for journalism and media publishing. But I think very often to myself in terms of, yes, there are challenges, but I want to sort of go into a little bit of the uniqueness about the Norwegian market, because I see Code Red, but I see also a market that has 80 to 90% direct traffic, numbers that other publishers in the world would die for. We have the highest subscriber numbers when it comes to sort of per capita and the willingness to pay. It's rather, it makes it very much a unicorn market. And when I see the head title Code Red, I think definitely there's other countries that would die for it. So maybe it's Code Red, I don't know. But if I were to compare, like, what's unique about the Norwegian media market and what make project like this possible in the end? Because you said there's a lot of trust amongst the publishers. Talk to the uniqueness of the Norwegian market.
Yeah, there's a lot. I realized this specifically after traveling a lot in Europe, talking to other researchers and how they set up their measurements, that, yeah, we are quite unique in the way that we've done things and are able to do this because of some of the typicalities of the Norwegian market, which is firstly, it's our culture. We're a very small market, we're transparent, everybody knows everyone. It's easy to have people sit down around the same table. We have experience of cooperation from earlier, so there's a trust between actors in the market that allows us to sit around and discuss how to benefit for everyone. So these strong relations. And then when it comes to the consumers, we have a huge digital maturity in Norway. So everyone has a smartphone, everyone's connected to the internet. It gave Norwegian publishers the opportunity to be early on with their digital newspapers. And then after a while, they realized that this is also something that we have to make people subscribe for. You can't give it away for free. So we were able to introduce successful models for payment also digitally. And that as a consequence of that, we had a lot of people, like you say, coming directly to the homepage, a lot of people logging in. Now we can see both people who have subscriptions, but also other people logging into the newspapers. So this gives us, from the measurements perspective, the important data that is necessary to provide these measurements. So we have high user revenues, we have strong brands, and still we have code red. That's one big explanation for that is how the advertising market has turned. We both, the subscriptions are not growing as it used to do. And at the same time, we see the global platforms take all the growth in the advertising market. At the same time as the global platform, they increased their advertising revenue with 1 billion Norwegian kroner. The editorial media lost 300 million. So you see the gap is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's even though 70-80% say they trust the Norwegian newspapers, while 10% trust social media. So there's a gap there, which also God was talking about, and also how the government adjust to this with new formats. Social platforms are widely using video, which is used commonly among the young audience. So this is also that the Norwegian publishers need to develop more video, more audio, which they do, but also then the system of support must be adjusted to that. So that's another discussion. I'm not into politics, but it's really important to know the context of this whole code red situation. So that makes these figures, the Medietall site, even more important, and the way, not only what we put there, but how we make it communicated to the market. So it's actually been known what you can achieve by advertising with editorial.
One thing that strikes with me is sort of also the evolution in digital adoption with the Norwegian publishers in being able to have logged in data and being able to have the one truth as we've been talking about here, which helps when you need to deliver statistic for it. And also in terms of the code red situation, that's maybe a podcast in itself, but I think the digital subscription is definitely been growing fast and is still growing, but I think it's maybe the revenues that is generated from print which is not able for the digital to keep up compared to the losses of the print, which will be now a very interesting moving forward. But I would want to sort of also, I think that there's a lot of the things that's been done in the Norwegian market which sometimes I hear at events almost like when Norwegian publishers are up speaking and I hear in the background by other nationalities, oh my God, such a unicorn market in many ways. And if there's listeners now or if there's people at different events, like what would you be advising if there's like a country wanting to copy sort of like what Medietall been doing or the Norwegian model? What would you tell them in terms of building up the Medietall, what role it plays and what they want to be doing? Like, what's your advice for them?
yeah, give us a call. No, we're happy to share information about how we've done this. But I think one major thing is to take ownership. That's what we decided to do. We need to own this solution ourselves. We need to work with great partners. We couldn't do it alone, but we need to own this, and we need to anchor it all the way to the top. Some things that maybe this is only researchers, but it's actually a part of the story of the news media industry in Norway. So we've been able to anchor this all up to our board, the top board, and also all of our other committees. So it's a broad anchoring. So I think that's also very important to start with. And also just like be a little bit pragmatic. You know, things can get very, very complicated. Things are complicated, things are technical, but to balance this, how to not have to change everything every week, every month, but also staying accurate on the numbers.
We've been talking a lot about the competition advantage this gives the publishers, how we're creating the one truth here, and then also the challenges that we've been talking about. But then I want to look into a little bit the road ahead and your outlook for the future, because where do you see the media numbers and Medietall, as we say in Norwegians, it's so difficult to say like even 2 years, but then I'm going to say 5 years ahead, because what will it need to deliver for the industry with so much change for it still to have like it to be helpful for the advertisers to care about this? Like, what is it that you need to deliver the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's probably a lot that we haven't foreseen yet, but I think it's important to have two thoughts at the same time. One is actually to value this stability over the years that we've been measuring, that we can continue to that when everything else changes. We can see how things have developed from the 1960s until today. Even though the methodology has changed a bit, we can still give this data to the market. So I think that's important to remember also forward, not just to jump on any opportunity to measure any KPI. But at the same time, we need to adjust, of course, to the changes. We see major changes in formats, the introduction of a lot more audio, the importance of video, young user groups using social media, big editorial actors like VG, TV2, NRK being present on TikTok, for example, with their content in order to reach these audiences, and how to draw them back to the front page. What would the future media consumption look like, and how can we measure this? Now, today, we measure pure domains. We measure apps, we measure websites, but how do we measure the content from VG on TikTok to get the big picture, for example? How do we measure trust? Could that be another important KPI? Kantar was just out talking about it, how they now start serving trust on each media brand to be able to deliver this to the market. Could we integrate that into the measurements as well? Yeah, so I think we always just need to listen to the market, listen to the publishers, listen to the advertisers. What would the important value be for them?
The last podcast I had was with Dana, who's the director in Moppo, and she said, when I asked her the thoughts about what the publishers and news media need to do for the future, she said, act calm, but also act swiftly, like fast.
Yeah, I
And
think that sums it up very well.
yeah, it's very close to that, because I truly believe is that our habits is just changing so fast, and especially with the adoption of AI and how the way we consume content is, it also changes how we're looking at numbers. Like you said, there, the format changing and so on. And maybe the most important thing here would be the communication here with the media publishers and what they are wanting to build for that direct engagement with the readers, because I think trusted people come for the publishers for the trust, but it's also how we're going to interact is going to change, and therefore also numbers. So like, what do you think, like numbers that you measure today, you said now with trust, I mean, would it be more like linked to direct engagement with different formats almost done in terms of the numbers you would look at for the future?
Well, that's very hard to foresee. And that's why I'm so lucky that I have a steering committee that helps me to, or helps the business, the media as a whole, to see where we're going. But I think one thing that we need to take in is that how media use will continue to be fragmented. You know, in the old days, it was only the printed newspapers. Now you have all kinds of sources. And if you put AI into this, you'll see even more of a convergence. Like, how will search change? We already see that figures for search, they're on their way up, but less people click on the links, which means less traffic goes back to the publishers. Another example is how different media channels start integrating chatbots into their own websites, providing this information that you can get from Perplexity or ChatGPT or other artificial intelligence systems. So how will this change how we consume newspapers? I think you were discussing in another episode as well. What would the front page look like? You know, the front page of search is changing. How would the front page of publishers change? And that's something that will also, of course, affect how we measure. And I'm not going to say anything about what that will look like, but it's for sure going to be interesting to follow.
At least the changes are coming and they're happening quite fast. And I think even for us in Kilkaya being an analytics company, how we look at how we're now measuring not necessarily articles, but content overall, the different formats. We're constantly thinking about the next part of the future on this. So it's one
Yeah.
of the constant challenges and changes
And we also
happening.
measure all types of content, whether it's audio or video today within these domains. So that's important for us to also include everything. And I think related to what you were saying earlier, also regarding trust, when you see that the global risks now that were mentioned by the World Economic Forum, where over the next couple of years, number one is misinformation and disinformation. So there lies important opportunity also for the publishers to take their position in that, both that and the third threat, I think, was polarization, which is also an important role for editorial media.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the hot topics in Arendalsuka in terms of polarization. But then again, this is where the publishers can play a role in many ways. I am betting in terms of like personalization of content when we're talking about homepages. This is where you can set the rules, because do not create the echo chamber as social media, but do create a way that has the editorial integrity. But this is that's for another time. Like, I want to also look into Bente. I've been implementing a new part into the podcast, which I like to call quick fire, and I like to tie it in a little bit into the conversation we've been having, but it's just quick answers in terms of the questions, and we can of course elaborate a little bit on it. But then my first question to you is, what's the most common misunderstanding amongst you publishers, the advertisers, about the numbers? Is there a common misunderstanding that's happening?
Well, I think we're getting better now, but we changed the system in 2018. Before that, we used interview-based methods to measure also digital reach, and we changed that. And there are still some questions about, well, how do you manage to do this interview-based? This new system that we have using publishers' data, using technical data, it still takes time for everyone to catch up with that. So that's a question that we get, and there's always confusion when we publish data, because sometimes we publish circulation data, sometimes we publish reach. So I think what it tells us is, like, always when you communicate about statistics, you need to be very clear what you're communicating and what this represents. That's generally for everyone talking about data, talking about statistics. You can never be clear enough on what this is about, I think.
And what's one thing editors should do differently next week because this data exists, compared to if they wouldn't have data from Medietall?
I think which they actually do as well, but just continue to use it and continue to talk to people about how easy it is to use it, so we can spread it to more user groups. And then just keep innovating, keep investing in the content that they do, and use this data actively with advertisers also, and invite them to participate in developing it further with us.
And what's one word to describe the future of the Norwegian news media?
One word. I think you said code red. I think I would say challenging. There are several roadblocks ahead. You have the global platforms now reaching 50% of the advertising market and still growing a lot more than native advertising or traditional banner advertising. Challenging with the economy and challenging to reach young consumers. Challenging with the aspect of integrating AI. Also opportunities, but challenging regarding where information is both produced and distributed. So I think we also need to look at the opportunities. Norwegian media has shown again and again that they're innovative, that they can change, they can keep up. Yeah, challenging, but also a bit of optimism in there. I think we should have.
Yeah, I mean, when there's challenges, there's opportunities. And for
Always.
people who knows me, I'm a big fan of movie quotes, and we should maybe do the Rocky Balboa. It ain't about how many times you get it; it's about how many times you get it and keep moving forward. And I think the
Yeah.
media market has been able to take the challenges, and I think also, at least for the Norwegian market, they've been able to innovate and then be able to keep up with the media habits. But that's changing so rapidly now, so I would definitely agree with you. Bente, this has been fantastic, and in this podcast, we have a closing tradition where the previous guest gets to leave a question for the next one, not knowing who they are. The previous guest I had, I did mention it here in our conversation. That was Dana, who's the director of product in Moppo, Morgenpost Hamburg in Germany. And I asked her what's her favorite tool that she couldn't live without at work, and she said Basecamp because that's a project management tool, and she loves projects. So her question to you is, what's the most fun project that you've been part of in your job, and why?
Wow. Yeah, I love projects too. That's what I do. So I think for me, coming to MBL, previously I used to work with a publisher called Nettavisen, which was the fourth, fifth largest at the time. And to be able to work on projects involving all the publishers, getting all the viewpoints, getting access to thoughts, attitudes towards where we're going in the future. I think it's not a single project, but it's what we do at MBL and how we facilitate these arenas to share knowledge. And I think one example of that is, of course, starting working on renewing the audience measurements, getting access, looking into the publisher's own data systems. Yeah, I like that too. I like communicating to the market, but being able to see this data firsthand and figure out how can we make this beneficial for the whole market. I think that was really exciting, and it was a lot of hard work. It's not that fun tagging 200 websites and making sure the data is correct, but the output and the strategic discussions, I think that was one of the more fulfilling processes in the project management that I've been involved with.
And just lastly, one thought that sort of struck me in terms of because having seen sort of similar setups, you have, for example, Brett in Romania, and I've seen also different data alliances gathering where segmentation across publishers are generated to then have better offerings compared to big tech. I mean, just as how important our organization like MBL, of course, you work then with the publishers in order to have something like this be a success, like having like an independent organization that sort of can own this as well is quite important to make it a success in my mind. I mean, any thoughts on this in terms of that's at least how I see from
Yeah,
others and what you explain?
well, that's what we're here for, so I hope we can make some use of us. So I think most importantly, being the neutral part, gathering all the publishers to these discussions to the same tables, respecting the different views and moving things forward. I think that's helpful. And also when we were speaking about Romania and Brett Arena, this community that we have also in Europe, because there are not a lot of people in the world working with audience measurements. So to be able to have this network also in Europe to share knowledge between the organizations is really beneficial for everyone, I think.
Makes completely sense. Bente, you get to ask a question for the next guest, not knowing who that person is. What's a burning question that you have? It's definitely somebody in the industry. What's a question you want to ask that person?
Okay, Nils, thank you for the opportunity. I don't know who the next visitor would be, so I think a question that everyone can relate to is what we're talking a lot about today, and that's the situation between the local publishers in Norway and the global platforms. We know today that the global platforms, they have about 50% of the advertising market. So what should the publishers do? We now know that they're working on different initiatives, for example, streamlining their formats and stuff like that. But what in your mind would be a clever move to gain more of the advertising income and compete even better with the global giants? That will be my question for the next.
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? Or a billion in terms
I
of the
think so.
advertising cake, in terms of how it is. And I think it's a great question, which I will bring to the next guest. Bente, thank you so much for joining the podcast and sharing the learnings and how you operate in MBL with the Medietall, the media numbers, and how it acts as a strong foundation to then show the strength that media publishers are having. And we're really happy to work together with you in Kilkaya as well. So I just want to say thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for putting Medietall on the map.
Welcome.